Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Paul Helft. I'm the director of the Fairbanks Center for Medical Ethics, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here to the Fairbanks Center lecture in clinical ethics, which is coordinated by our program coordinator, Amy Chamness, who's outside. So I'd like to thank her. I have a few housekeeping items before I introduce our speaker for today. This lecture is being recorded and broadcasted, and I'd like to welcome those of you joining us from IU Health Ball Memorial, North, West, and Arnett. Just a reminder to silence your cell phones, if you wouldn't mind, out of courtesy to the speaker. You can see the intriguing title from today, and it's my great pleasure to introduce my colleague and friend, Patty Bledsoe. Patty is the current program manager of and the first inaugural and remaining only program manager of our center, and a senior affiliate faculty member at the center. I had the pleasure of hiring Patty in 2005 after she had been a transplant social worker on the Bone Marrow Transplant Center for 14 years at IU Hospital. How many social workers do we have in the audience today? So even many of the social workers I know and respect say things like Patty's the best social worker they ever met. That's probably true, among many other things. Patty has a bachelor's degree from Franklin College and 2 master's degrees, one of which is in social work from Indiana University. She has trained and done training in several of the most prominent ethics programs around the country. And I, on a personal note, want to say that of all of the many incredibly wonderful teachers that I've had over many years around clinical ethical issues, Patty ranks up at the top of that list. I've learned more from Patty than I've learned from just about anybody else about how to think about difficult clinical ethical problems. And she has, as you'll figure out, an enormous expertise in the area of how to take care of those who are in some way, shape, or form different from us. So I can't wait for the lecture today, and I want to thank Patty for taking her time to do this. Thanks.
Thank you. Paul is so kind, and it's great to work for somebody who is so kind. Thank you very much, Paul. We have a record for today's lecture. We have our youngest attendee. We have a baby in the audience, and I am so excited. It feels like Amish church. And just like the Amish, if the baby gets fussy, we can just pass her around, and she'll enjoy new faces. Okay. So thank you all for coming. Full disclosure, I have a great affection for the Amish people that I've worked with. So when we think about the spectrum that we hear comments about the Amish, we will hear them reviled, we will hear them ridiculed. We know that they are victimized by a lot of vandalism in their own communities. But then there are others who romanticize and idealize them. I tend to be more toward the romanticizing and idealizing them. I have worked over the years at IU Hospital with many old order Amish patients and their families. I have visited them in their homes and in their communities. I've attended a wedding. I've attended funerals. I've attended their mutual benefit fundraisers to raise money to help the patients who are in treatment here. I've attended their school fundraisers, and I still hear from 2 families every year at Christmas time when they write me a note. So I am enormously grateful for the richness of these relationships, and I hope that in the course of our conversation today that you too can be challenged with new information and maybe stimulated to do some internal reflection about some stereotypes you may hold, and that you may, in the long run, be a more humble caregiver. I'll show you a slide at the end where I use the term cultural humility. But first, a little story. Last year, my son and his wife moved to a suburb of Pontiac, Michigan, and they had the audacity to take my 2 grandchildren with them. So the little 4-year-old on a visit to the mall in that area, and that's a very, very diverse population in that part of the United States and that part of Michigan. So they were at the mall near Pontiac one day, and little Connor happened to see 2 women in burqas. There's a big Muslim population there. And so these 2 women were in full burqas, and he went, as 4-year-olds do, "Mommy, look, there are ninjas here." And of course, his mother kind of pulled him behind a pillar and said, "No, those are not ninjas, and you can't say that, don't point like that." Anyway. So I use that story because women in burqas in the United States are a curiosity. They are shrouded in mystery. They seem to be distant and sequestered. And so in many ways, my grandson's surprise at seeing women in burqas is much like our surprise or fascination or intrigue or curiosity when we first meet Amish people. They look different. The old order Amish look different. And I'm going to distinguish between the old order Amish and other people we might call Amish or who might refer to themselves as Amish because they are a distinct group. It's not advancing. Oh, I'm pushing the wrong thing, I bet. There we go. There we go. If I push the right arrow, I'm technologically challenged. More technologically challenged than many of the Amish people I know. I'm going to make a disclaimer about the photographs that I've included in the slides. Amish do not want to be photographed. Most of these photographs were taken by non-Amish people with telephoto lenses without the permission of the Amish who are in the pictures. Amish consider photographs to be prideful, to be graven images, to support individualism, which is all contrary to Amish religious belief. But the people that I am describing are people who may look much like the people in these photographs. So you saw in the advertisement for today's lecture what I hope to cover in the time that we have available. I want to identify what I mean by English providers, and basically an English provider is any of us, regardless of what our work involves. We are thought of as the English by the Old Order Amish because we speak English as our first language. They speak English as their third language behind their colloquial Pennsylvania Dutch or Swiss, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more, and the German that they use for worship. So English is their third language. And so most of us don't think about the Old Order Amish as having limited English proficiency, but they do. Okay, here are some cases that have provoked some ethics concerns among us over the years, and I'm just highlighting them here, and I hope to intersperse more information about these cases as we go along. Amanda, a 15-year-old with Down syndrome who is 8 weeks pregnant. Helen, who was actually the first Amish patient that I met years and years ago. She was at the time 15 years old, had chronic myelogenous leukemia, and her bishop declined bone marrow transplant due to the community hardship it would cause. Paul, about 24 years when he was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, who reluctantly accepted Medicaid, which was against a basic tenet of the old order Amish faith that they should not be tied to government assistance. Kenosha, about 26 years old when she came to us for stem cell transplant for recurrent lymphoma, and there was a bit of a quandary about her father and her husband refusing home oxygen at one point. Laura, a 3-month-old with SCIDS, whose parents asked to forego aggressive treatment. That provoked a meeting of the Riley Pediatric Review Committee. At the time, there may be some of you in the audience who were at that meeting. Jason, a 15-year-old with aplastic anemia, whose parents requested that he be transferred to a clinic in Mexico for holistic therapy. Mark, a 34-year-old with severe burns. This patient was at Wishard, who insisted on treatment with an herbal salve, much to the burn team's consternation. And then pediatric cystic fibrosis patients. About a year and a half ago, Gabe Boslett and I met with the PEDS pulmonary fellows to talk about their concerns about PEDS cystic fibrosis patients whose communities cannot afford best practices new therapies. So when I talk about the old order Amish, I'm talking about horse and buggy, no church meeting house. They have church in individual homes that they rotate around every 2 weeks. They wear plain clothes that are of prescribed style, and they use horse-drawn farm implements. They limit their farms, this is an aside, they limit their farms to between 50 and 100 acres. One, because that's what's practical to till and cultivate with horse-drawn implements, but also they feel that acquiring more land than that for an individual family is greedy and prideful and deprives other people of the ability to have a livelihood and raise their children in an agrarian atmosphere, which they value very highly. So they limit their farm sizes in the interest of the community's good. So some of the ethics concerns that we have in the dilemmas that we've encountered with our Amish patients are the absence of individual autonomy. And that is because of the belief in Gelassenheit, which is humility like none of us can understand. It's humility at the cellular level, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. We worry about assuring informed consent, one, because of the language barrier, because their vocabularies in English are very limited. We worry about assurance that informed refusal is that they are truly informed in the refusal of treatment when it comes to their refusal of treatment. We worry about respect for persons, balancing competing goods, our need to do good medicine and to give the best that we know to give in the face of the Amish families' competing goods of the community's sustainability, the fact that they basically pay cash for all of their medical care because they're not allowed to participate in government or commercial insurance. We worry about avoiding harm, and we worry mightily about the ethical acceptability of good enough medicine versus state-of-the-art medicine or best practice, cutting-edge therapy, which we're able to offer and believe that we can do good through. So who are the Amish? They are a growing and a thriving minority. There are 463 Amish settlements in North America, which encompass 30 states and Ontario. Their population is doubling every 20 years and has been for a very long time. The reason the population is doubling at 7 times the rate of the general U.S. population is that they have very large families, and about 90% of their children choose to remain in the Amish faith and choose baptism between 18 and 22 years old. So they retain their members. They produce a lot of members and retain their members. There are also Amish settlements in Mexico and Central America, interesting to me is that these settlements originated in Pennsylvania when whole communities just lifted up stakes and moved to Central America or Mexico because they felt that their religious freedom was threatened around compulsory education. And this was at a time when many Amish fathers were jailed. It was right before the United States Supreme Court ruling in 1972, allowing the Amish to educate their children only to 8th grade in their own schools. In Indiana, we have 22 settlements, almost 50,000. In fact, I checked the statistics on Friday. We may have 50,000 by now, members in the Amish communities in Indiana. 335 church districts. Now, it's important, the number of church districts is important because each church district has a different way of implementing the rules of the community. And so when you've met one Amish family, you have not met them all. When you've met one Amish bishop, you have not met them all. We cannot make assumptions about Amish in other church groups based on our interaction with a single church group or a single bishop or a single family. So in Indiana, we have the third highest number of Amish residents behind Ohio and Pennsylvania. Most people don't realize that Pennsylvania doesn't have the greatest number. Ohio has the greatest number, second is Pennsylvania, and third is Indiana. So the Amish community organization is comprised of the family, the church district, the settlement, and the affiliation. Now, that's important because of the way the Amish organize themselves, the importance that they place on the family and on the church district. Remember, they meet in each other's homes for their church services. Each church district only has 25 to 40 families, each one led by a bishop, 2 ministers, and a deacon. Having church at your house is a big deal because you have to clear out all the furniture, open up all the doors between the rooms, and a wagon brings all the church benches where people sit for the 2-hour services on long benches that are arranged in rows in all the rooms of the house, and these benches don't have any backs and they're only about 12 inches wide. So they have a great tolerance for fanny fatigue. Each church district, led by the bishop, has its own interpretation of the Ordnung. Now, I'm pronouncing that as they pronounce it in English. If they're pronouncing it in their colloquial Pennsylvania Deutsch or Pennsylvania Dutch, they pronounce it Ordnung. I'm more comfortable with Ordnung. That's the Amish understanding of their social order. The affiliations, which don't necessarily have to be contiguous geographically, are the groups of Amish throughout the state or the country that have similar ways of understanding their Ordnung. So they're unwritten rules for behavior that are based on accumulated traditional wisdom, grounded in Scripture, but they prescribe how Amish life will be ordered. The Ordnung provides social cohesiveness, community solidarity, and community identity. So it even dictates by outward signs how wide the brims of the men's hats are, or what style and fabric the women's bonnets are. So if you're really smart about the Amish, you will know what part of the state and how conservative the Ordnung and the church district are by the width of the man's hat, by the width of the men's hats. Hat brims. So here's how the Amish are populated throughout Indiana, mostly in rural areas. The Amish community in Allen County near Fort Wayne is in the country. That Graybill community is the one that is closest to a major metropolitan area. All other Amish communities throughout the country are not nearly as close to large cities. Notice that there's, in the in terms of the immigrant stream of Amish to Indiana, there's kind of a break-off between the 6th settlement and the 7th of almost 100 years. So the earliest Amish came to Indiana around 1840, and they were Swiss Amish who came straight from Europe. Some of them bypassed into Canada for a while and then into Indiana. Others are the Pennsylvania Dutch Amish who first settled in Pennsylvania and then started migrating westward. And so now Indiana has settlements that comprise Amish from New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and other places because they are constantly splitting communities so that they can acquire more land that's affordable land so that their growing families can sustain themselves. So our two distinct immigrant streams represent two Amish ethnicities. This is also important to highlight the diversity of the Amish people that we meet when they come to us for health care. They don't even speak the same language. They don't understand each other's language. So those who speak Pennsylvania Dutch do not understand the Swiss Amish when they are speaking their Swiss dialect. And I'm told it's easier for a person who speaks the Swiss dialect to learn Pennsylvania Dutch than it is the other way around. So you look at the possibility that English may be their fourth language. So a third of the old order Amish in Indiana are Swiss, and we have the highest concentration of Swiss Amish. Important because the Swiss Amish tend to be more orthodox and conservative than the already conservative Pennsylvania Dutch Amish. Two different folkways, two different dialects. Around Paoli, Indiana, and in southern Indiana, they have an especially conservative Ordnung. I like to know when I meet somebody here who is old order Amish, I like to know what part of the state they're from. And I like to know whether they're Swiss Amish or Pennsylvania Dutch Amish, because it helps me frame how the conversations around medical care may go based on their conservative and fundamental attachments to their Ordnung. In the Paoli area and in southern Indiana, which is where my first Amish patient was from, the one whose bishop refused bone marrow transplant due to community hardship for a 15-year-old. They were from southern Indiana. They were of a very conservative group. In southern Indiana, the Ordnung bars married men from working away from home. In the northern part of the state and elsewhere, most Amish men work off the land as well as do the farm work. They have to be employed in some kind of industry or construction trade in order to make enough money to sustain the family. But in southern Indiana, they're forbidden from doing that. And they also have limited use of technology for the industries or the work that they might do in their home as a cottage industry to make more money. So my sense is that there's greater economic hardship and greater burden on the community to pay for health care among the very conservative groups in southern Indiana than elsewhere in the state. So briefly, the Amish are an Anabaptist. They are Anabaptist Christians. That doesn't mean anti-Baptist. It means different baptism. They don't believe in baptizing children. They believe that one should make an adult decision to join the faith and commit to a life as a believer. And so they are groups that originated in the 15th and 16th centuries around the time of the Protestant Reformation in Europe. They were first led by a Menno Simmons. So if anybody asks you which came first, the chicken or the egg, the Mennonites or the Amish, the Mennonites came first. And then in 1693, the followers of Jacob Ammon separated from the Swiss Mennonites over the concept of, I think it's pronounced Maidang, and basically that is the church discipline of shunning. And so the Amish, the Old Order Amish, still practice Maidang and separated from the Mennonites over that. There was huge religious persecution during this time of all Anabaptists. And so the Amish are heavily influenced, and I'll speak more about that in a minute, by their martyr culture and their history of martyrdom for their faith. In 1730, the first Amish immigrated to North America, to the William Penn Colony, in an effort to seek religious freedom and to get away from the horrible persecution that they were enduring in Europe. There is note in Benjamin Franklin's writings of his having done commerce with the Amish in the William Penn Colony. The concept of Gelassenheit, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, is extremely important to understanding the Amish way of thinking. They are not critical thinkers. They do not think with a scientific mind. They are imbued with the religious and cultural imperative to be submissive, to be humble, to self-surrender to God. It's the absolute opposite of autonomy and individualism. Now, when we are first concerned about medical decision making, what do we make sure we do first? Make sure the patient has decisional capacity. We want to preserve their autonomy. We want them to make independent choices. We want them not to be under the pressure of influence from outside others. The Amish don't understand this at all. It's not in their DNA. Individualism is simply not part of their vocabulary. We also are challenged with the Amish worldview, and that is that the world represents pride, greed, war, sin, vice, torture, religious discrimination. So what do we represent? The world. Because anybody who is not Old Order Amish is of the world. So then we become a mass of people who need to be held at arm's length because we are, to the mind of someone deeply acculturated as an Old Order Amish person, we could pose a threat of exploitation, of mistreatment, because they are so imbued with the martyr culture. Their separation from the world by their lifestyle, their appearance, their behavior, their values, their interpretation of the Christian Bible, is guided in many ways by the quote from Corinthians, "Be not unequally yoked with unbelievers." And they know that if you have two oxen yoked to pull through the field, if one of them behaves differently than the other, you're not going to be able to plow a straight row. That the different one, be it stronger or more manipulative or whatever, will lead astray. They believe very deeply in the redemptive community of mutual care. And so they look out for each other. There is no better social security than to be a member of the Old Order Amish community. The Martyrs Mirror is this is what it looks like. It's a 1,200-page book that is in most Amish homes, either in German or English. It is their folklore of martyrdom. This traces the history of Christian martyrs from the time of Christ all the way through the 1700s and describes in exquisite detail burnings at the stake, beheadings, drownings, beatings, and other atrocities that were perpetrated upon the Anabaptists by the church authorities at the time. About 4,000 Anabaptists were tortured and killed during the period from 1527 to 1614. So these accounts of martyrdom are still very much at the forefront of Amish consciousness. They read these stories to their children. They hear these stories reiterated during their church services. So life for a 21st century Amish person is always in the shadow of the 16th century experience of their ancestors. And that was at a time when church and state were inextricably linked, and your religious beliefs and your religious practices were linked to your citizenship. So the Anabaptists were persecuted because they either did not baptize their babies or they rebaptized themselves as adults. That was their crime. That was their crime. Oops, let's go. So their core values are very closely held. Their value of pacifism places them among the 4 peace churches that are recognized by the United States government as having automatic conscientious objection status during times that we have conscription for military service. So the Quakers, the Mennonites, the Church of the Brethren, and the Amish are all recognized as conscientious objectors and are not required to go to war. Value work very, very highly. Frugality is a very important value. They teach their children a little rhyme: use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without. That comes into play with Kenosha's father's and her husband's refusal of Homo too. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Their symbolic separation includes not being connected to public utilities. So please don't do what I did the first time I ordered a hospital bed for an Amish home and order a semi-electric hospital bed. I was just rocking along, and the lady up in northern Indiana who deals with the Amish all the time at the home care agency, she calls me up and she said, "Patty, you sure you want a semi-electric hospital bed? They don't have any electricity in their house." They don't participate in government programs, as I said before. No commercial insurance, separate language, plain dress. So they have this great array of symbolic separation. With their mutual aid, they do pay for medical care. They pay per baptized member of the household a monthly assignment or a monthly allotment to their church district's benevolent fund. Now, not only medical care, but barn raisings, help with other tragedies, floods, anything is paid for the community benefit to those who need help from the mutual aid fund. They're also required to pay their bills in full within 6 months. So they are very good customers of ours. They don't get a very good discount from us. They pay quicker than the insurance companies pay us. The last time I checked was many years ago, and then it was $85 a month per baptized member. So when you look at how big some of these households can be of people who are baptized but not married and out on their own, that can be a hefty sum every month, even at the old rate of $85 a month. I read recently a speculation that has probably doubled by now. So, $160 a month per baptized member into the mutual aid fund. They pray for all governments, but they do not pledge allegiance to any flag. They do vote sometimes, but they don't run for public office. They obey all laws. They pay taxes. In fact, they pay school taxes twice because they also have to pay for the support of their private Amish schools. So they pay property taxes, which in part in Indiana pay for public schools. They pay sales taxes. They pay employment taxes. They pay Social Security taxes if they're employed off the land, although few of them ever use Social Security. Yet they pay those taxes. So one of the pejorative things you might hear around here about the Amish is, oh, they're freeloaders, they don't pay taxes. That is simply not true. That is simply not true. They pay all the same taxes that any property owner and shopper and user of goods and services would pay. They don't oppose technology. They're just very intentional and selective about how they use it. And it's amazing when you visit an Amish home to see how creative and adaptive and frugal they are in their use of technology. And again, the use of technology is regulated by the church district and the opinion of the bishop. So any change at all or any innovation at all needs to be approved by the bishop, and the community needs to reach a consensus about it. So the idea that the gentleman up in the upper left, this comes from the brochure that the Young Center for Anabaptist and Pietist Studies has sent out, advertising an Amish and Technology conference that they're having this spring. So the gentleman in an electric wheelchair is not defying any rules. It has probably been deemed appropriate for him to have this wheelchair, which he's probably recharging with solar chargers or recharging with a diesel generator. Use diesel generators, they use pneumatic power, they use a lot of kerosene, they use batteries. So it was the decision was made that this would improve his life. One of the goals of treatment is improving the quality of life. So if an electric wheelchair was the only way to bring him back to be a productive member of the community and to make him feel like he was again able to work is a very, very important value, then so be it. His community allowed him to have an electric wheelchair. Many Amish have cottage industries where they manufacture precision parts for things that they're not allowed to own. And they do it very ingeniously and with great workmanship. The lamp that's over on the far right, the kind I've seen had a nice little wooden cabinet around the bottoms to hide the propane tank. But that can be wheeled around from room to room. They don't have any central heat. And of course, they don't have any electricity. They're used to very low levels of light. So when you meet an Amish patient here who has the lights off in his or her room, or who has the blinds drawn, don't think they're depressed, please. Our lighting hurts their eyes because they are so used to very low levels of lighting. The other thing I want to caution you about it while my mind is there is if you see an Amish person at the bedside with his or her elbows on the bed and hands on the forehead, kind of like this, don't think they're despondent. They're praying. That's a posture of prayer, which I could not appreciate until I attended an Amish church service. But there were several points where everybody got up, turned around, kneeled with the bench in front of them, and prayed for a while, like that. The other interesting thing, I have to throw this in. There's a passage in the Bible that says, whenever the name of Jesus is spoken, every knee should bend and every head should bow. So during their church services, when they're standing and the preacher says, Jesu Christu, everybody goes like this. Just very most discreet, which I found very interesting. An example of how literally they take what is written in the Bible. Amish education, as I said before, their ability to educate their own children in their own schools only through 8th grade is protected by a U.S. Supreme Court decision. Their curriculum is very basic, reading, writing, and arithmetic, and only as much science as is necessary to understand agricultural practices and home things like canning and cleanliness in food preparation and that kind of thing. The Amish teachers who teach the Amish students are themselves products of Amish education. So they themselves were only educated to 8th grade in Amish schools. Kids don't learn English until they go to 1st grade and are taught English by the Amish teacher. So the teachers don't receive any specialized education at all beyond their own education in the Amish school. So the very, very basic curriculum, coupled with the level of education of the teachers, means that the Amish people that we meet in our environment are uniquely I'm trying not to use a judgmental word. They're uniquely prevented. How's that? They're uniquely prevented from understanding the enormously complicated things that we ask them to understand when they're considering something like a major surgery or bone marrow transplant or the other kinds of things, because we only see the sickest of the sick here. And so please keep in your mind that the language as well as the education that they undergo mean that we have to make extraordinary effort to meet them where they are and slow down our pace. A buggy goes 10 miles an hour with a horse drawing it. Doesn't go 0 miles an hour without a horse on it. And our average speed is what? 55 to 75 miles an hour. And the speed at which we talk here is even more intense than that, and we're even more crunched for time. The Amish are very, very uncomfortable and put off by how hurried we are, and that does not build trust to be in such a big hurry. So their sources of truth and sources of knowledge are important for us to keep in mind, and they place great authority on tradition. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over much about Amish forgiveness other than to say they won't sue us. They do not press charges. They don't take people to court. So for any of you who are worried about that and practicing good enough medicine, let it go. So humility, thrift, and simplicity. This is an Amish kitchen. Notice there's a wood stove. The other stove over on the right is usually powered by kerosene. There's a refrigerator that you can't see that's also powered by kerosene. The Amish that we see here in Indianapolis for critical care, many of them are burn patients because there are a lot of burns because of the amount of combustible agents that they use in farming and in their homes, because they don't use gas from the gas company. They use propane, and they don't use electricity from the grid. So when we meet them, it's helpful to remember that their core belief is that medicine may help. Notice the may. Medicine may help, but it's God who heals. They're extremely health conscious, and they're very attuned to people who may not be well in their community. They consider good health to be somebody with a good appetite, a healthy appearance, and who can do rigorous physical labor. So that's what they strive toward. The Bible, as they understand it, does not forbid any medical treatments. So they, not to be confused with Jehovah's Witnesses who don't believe in blood transfusions. The Amish don't interpret the Bible to prohibit any specific medical treatments. So they are open to what we have to offer. Most of the health problems that we see here at the Academic Medical Center are from farm accidents, buggy accidents, construction work injuries, burns, oncology problems that can't be handled in their local community. There are great variations among Amish communities and individual families about the use of health resources. That's a very un-Amish pager I'm hearing. About the use of health resources and practices of preventive care. Prenatal care usually begins later in pregnancy For a first pregnancy, they might verify the pregnancy by going to the doctor or the nurse practitioner, and then they won't come back till they're about 4.5 months along. Subsequent pregnancies, this is normal. They probably won't seek prenatal care until about the 6th month of pregnancy. They don't practice birth control. They do not practice any pregnancy termination. It's highly rare for them to accept pregnancy termination, even if the life of the mother is endangered. And they don't involve themselves in prenatal diagnostic testing because they say, it won't make any difference. They consider every child to be a gift from God, regardless of problems, a precious gift from God. And they love that child and try to make it as much a part of the mainstream community as possible for as long as the child is physically alive. They do cooperate with medical research. They consider it to be a partnership of trust and mutual benefit. An ethics concern that I might offer is that they may be very vulnerable to therapeutic misconception and feel that some of the clinical trials that they are offered may have more benefit for help than they may understand. They have lower vaccination rates, and they are slow to see mental health as a medical problem. Although there are springing up in recent years mental health clinics and counseling practices for the Old Order Amish, but they're very slow to accept mental health issues as medical problems. So comparing English medicine to the Amish culture, we have some very distinct differences. We insist on honoring individual autonomy. We are very decisive, and we expect decisions to be made pretty quickly and efficiently. We are cost blind, although we're getting to the point now where the Affordable Care Act and other pressures are requiring that we be more aware of the costs of the medical care that we provide. But the Amish are very aware of the cost of the care that they agree to. Our vocabulary is very militaristic when we talk about our approach to disease and disease management. This is very offensive to the Amish, who are pacifist. They don't engage in physical violence. They don't self-defend. They don't go to war. And so when we talk about fighting the disease and winning the battle, this is totally alien to their consciousness. And we see death as a medical failure, and they accept death as a natural part of life. Now, these kinds of differences create very special problems in the pediatric population, and I want to congratulate the good people of Riley and our other pediatric programs for your sensitivity to the unique challenges that the Amish way of being in the world creates dilemmas for those who serve Amish pediatric patients, especially around parents' reluctance to accept the standard of care, the latest, greatest therapy, or what the Amish consider to be disproportionately expensive, extraordinary care to keep a patient alive when the outcome eventually will, in the end, be death anyway. Laura, the 3-month-old with severe combined deficiency syndrome, her situation was grieved by many here at Riley. It was grieved very deeply because the medical teams really thought that they could help that baby. Just a little bit about the Amish way of death. An Amish coffin is another non-Amish pager going on. The Amish rituals around death are very simple. The coffins are extremely simple. They really are pine boxes. This one is actually more fancy than the ones I've seen, and the ones I've seen are in the home for the funeral service, just on carpenter's sawhorses with no drapes, no fanciness at all. But the coffins or caskets that the Amish carpenters make for English customers are more like what you see at our funerals. They prefer terminal care to to be done at home, and they prefer death to occur at home, not in the hospital. So I've mentioned how slow to trust, the English, language and communication barriers, the importance of cost containment. Amish will usually ask for an Amish discount once they know you well, and expect that it will take several hours with the patient accounts people to help an Amish family fill out the application for a charitable discount, because our applications have things like, how much do you spend, what's your car payment? How much do you spend on gasoline every month? Those kinds of things. How much do you spend on food? Well, the Amish grow a lot of their own food and can it. And so it's very hard to put a cost on things like food. So social workers, be ready that it will take a long time and a lot of creative thinking and careful probing to get at the true information that you need to help reflect what it really costs in our language an Amish family to live. They won't ask questions. They won't offer opinions. They're more likely to retreat to silence in the face of conflict than they are to become more verbal, because asking questions, challenging, and offering opinions is considered prideful, and it's very uncomfortable for them. So the people they choose as brokers, more likely a social worker than a chaplain, because a chaplain carries a different level of theological baggage to them. And so the people they choose as brokers, if you can help them ask the questions that they are unwilling to ask, but they need to know the answers to, that will be a huge service. Kenosha and Homo too. They were, the husband and the father were saying they didn't need home oxygen for her. And she was on continuous oxygen in the hospital. And we couldn't get it why they were refusing. And of course, everybody was in a twit because they thought that the expectation of the family was that she was just going to go home and suffer. No, they didn't want her to suffer. They had a different plan. Remember frugality? Well, they see us throw away a lot of stuff here. Their plan was that they would just take that oxygen hosing, and nasal cannula that we connect to the wall. Well, they would just kind of roll that up because it didn't need to be thrown away. It could still be used. And they would use the blacksmith's oxygen tank, because they could get the blacksmith's oxygen for only $10 a tank, and it was just down the road at home. So a referral for Homo too, once I figured out what their plan was, that they didn't really think they had to share with us because they had a plan. Remember, they used technology selectively with creativity, innovation, baling wire and duct tape. They were going to patch together their own plan for Homo too. So a referral for Homo too that normally would take a care coordinator, case manager, or whoever's doing it, 15 minutes for any other family, took 4 hours for this one, because we had to get all the prices. We had to have people from the home care company come and demonstrate the equipment. Even before they agreed to do it, we had to have our respiratory therapists come and give a different kind of explanation about why they couldn't just use the blacksmith's oxygen, because you need things like regulators and humidifiers and all that stuff that I don't know all the details about. But that's just one small example of how there can be a disconnect or a miscommunication around something that we think is so simple, but not so simple really. Our attitudes and our manners speak volumes about us. They don't care how much we know until they trust how much we care, very literally. So building trust and taking the time to build the trust, and that means being down to earth. Yeah, it means being down to earth, because they have these Amish antenna that pick up people putting on airs. They don't, and that is a barrier to trust. the 15-year-old with Down syndrome, I'm calling her Amanda, who was 8 weeks pregnant. It's a long and complicated story, and we don't have enough time to go into it entirely. But the time I spent rapport building with them, with the parents and the patient, who was about this tall, there was no way that she had had consensual sex. She looked like a tiny little Amish doll, and she was very, very limited in her ability to speak and in her ability to interact. So she was quite cognitively impaired. And so the time I took to build rapport with the parents, and my walking into the room while she was having the pregnancy termination procedure. She had spent a whole day at Riley making sure this child had major heart defect, had been in treatment her entire life. It was deemed to be life-threatening, and she would probably die if she carried the pregnancy to term. But when I walked into the family, to the parents, as the young woman was in for the termination procedure, I said, I have to ask you some tough questions, and I'm really sorry I have to do this. But can you please tell me the story about how Amanda got pregnant? And the mother started to cry. Amish women are very contained, and I've only seen 3 cry in all my years of working with Amish, except at their funerals. The mother started to cry, and she said, we've been praying here, hoping that somebody would come in that we could talk to about this. So the time it takes to build rapport and asking the questions gently after that rapport is established is absolutely essential to getting to the heart of the matter and providing the care that we need to provide. Of course, that did result in a report to Child Protective Services. She had been impregnated by her brother, who was 11 months younger, who himself was developmentally disabled. She was found to be infected with chlamydia, which tells us that there was a third party involved somewhere, somehow. We will never know, but we got great response from the Child Protective Services people in the county where Amanda lives. We got great response from her parents, complete cooperation. Her bishop already knew about the situation. The bishop cooperated with allowing all the interviews that needed to take place, and so it was really, in the long run, a very satisfying experience, though it was probably the toughest experience I've ever had with an Amish family. This is a storyboard that was used for a research project conducted in Canaan, Indiana, about fire safety. I show you this to stress the importance of involving the bishop, the natural healer in the community. They use informal natural healers called brooch doctors, and the parents, the teacher, and to make the teaching materials culturally appropriate. You show a kid a video on an iPad or on a screen, and the medium confuses the message because they don't watch television, they don't listen to the radio, they don't sing anything except their hymns, which are not accompanied by musical instruments, they're chants. And so the ways we've developed of doing health education, our methods may get in the way of the message. And this links up with the effective work that was done in New York by a clinic that did outreach to the Amish community regarding the pediatric cystic fibrosis patients, and building their trust and helping them understand that the goals of more expensive treatment were worthy to consider because it could make the young people more productive members of the community. Alternative medicine, they go to the Contreras clinic in Tijuana, Mexico, where they treated Jason's aplastic anemia with red clover tea for 3 weeks. Discharged him. They took a train to Reno. He became febrile, was hospitalized in the ICU in Reno. They had to airlift him back to his community in northern Indiana. I've lost track of what happened to Jason, but they ended up spending a lot of money because of the fallout from the alternative treatment that they sought. The budget is the Amish newspaper where they publish the community's news. Every community has a scribe. There's no such thing as patient confidentiality among the Amish. They don't know about HIPAA. So you can read the budget and you can read about everything that's happening to all of our Amish patients at IU Hospital through the reports of the scribes to the 10,000 subscribers of the budget. And in closing, I would like to invite you to consider, I don't have, just like all problems in ethics, I don't have tidy answers or quick remedies for the ethical dilemmas that we encounter. But since it's 1 o'clock and we need to end, I'm showing you pictures of the open buggies that the Swiss Amish use year round. And I'd like to ask you to consider what is good enough. The buggy in the lower left has a kid box on the back of it. That's what they call it, a kid box. And so babies ride in the kid box. They use windshields. Literally, the windshield is an umbrella in front of the driver. So when we look at child safety issues and what we teach about car seat safety, the Amish consider this good enough for their children. And they love their children deeply. They don't consider their children to be expendable. But if this image will help you think about what's good enough medicine, and is it ethically defensible to compromise with good enough medicine after thoughtful consideration, thoughtful discussion, consultation with the ethics consult service, if you think that would help. Please consider that that building trust, being willing to think about what's good enough medicine, and being culturally humble and learning from every Amish patient that we meet are basically core things in terms of good practice with families from this background. Thank you very much for coming.
We're right at time, but anybody who has time to stick around, why don't we take a question or two? We understand that some of you will have to leave.
Barb? No. Their bishops and ministers are chosen by lot. The church community nominates them, and then they are chosen by lot. They have no formal training in theology. They have no higher education. They don't prepare sermons. They speak for 2 hours off the top of their heads and read scripture in between and tell stories from the Martyrs Mirror, but no formal training. So they don't have their own community doctor? They have their faith healer, Brooch Doctor, and they call that seeking a sympathy cure. And they will seek alternative medicine before they'll come see us. And so expect that they have sought many herbal cures and maybe have sat in uranium mines in Montana or, all kinds of things. They are very, very vulnerable to being victimized by snake oil salespeople who advertise in the budget, by the way. But they will have gone to great lengths with what we think of as alternative and herbal cures before they come see us. So frequently they're much later in the disease process by the time they seek our help. But they do believe deeply in folk remedies before English medicine, and they'll even go to chiropractors before they'll come see an English doctor. Anybody else? Yes? How frequent is wet nursing? I don't know. I have not read anything about wet nursing, but I can assume that if a new mother has problems with breastfeeding, that somebody in the community will be very willing to step up and help her out. And since birthing is so common in the Amish communities, I would expect that there would be a generous offer of assistance. And they do breastfeed their babies. It varies whether they birth their children in hospitals or at home with midwives. They're more inclined to use midwives and advanced practice nurses than they are physicians.
One last one. Lexi?
it's important to offer a conversation with the bishop and let the family decide whether it's important enough to involve the bishop. And the bishop will come. I have found the bishops to be very accommodating and eager to come to support the family and to hear with his own ears. They're always he's. There are no female clergy among the Amish.
You just send them a text message.
Right. Right. They do use cell phones selectively, though. If they have to for business, some of the people I know up in Graybill have had so many bad buggy accidents that they're now carrying cell phones for safety so that they can call for help quickly if they're run off the road by people speeding down the highway.
I'd like to thank Patty and anybody else who has a question. You'd be willing to stick around for a little while to ask.
Thank you.
That was great.
Oh, good.